As soon as you enter the gates at the UBC Botanical Garden, you'll find a meadow of grasses and wildflowers awaiting you, right in the middle of the parking lot. Stepping off your bike or out of your car, a small, winding path beckons, and walking down it, life abounds from all sides, as bees fly from flower to flower, moving between California poppies, clover, and flowering grasses. The plants provide a beautiful welcome to visitors, but just as importantly, they're an abundant food source for local pollinators. For horticulturalists here at the garden, creating a landscape that is aesthetically pleasing, biologically diverse, and ecologically resilient takes time and knowledge. It requires one to listen to how plants are responding and adapt accordingly, especially in a time of uncertain and rapid climatic changes. Welcome to Garden Ecologies. I'm your host Alison, and I'll be taking you into the UBC Botanical Garden to learn from horticulturalists about how they're incorporating ecological and regenerative practices into their work and what that journey has looked like for them. Hearing their experiences, we'll learn what they've learned from the process, and I hope you'll learn something new, find some inspiration to try new things in your own garden, and perhaps start to think about gardening in a new way. Today I'm here with Scott Ferguson, who manages the entrance gardens, to talk about his experiences with wildflower meadows and minimal mowing for pollinators, and how he tries to balance ecological benefits with social perceptions of wildness. As you may know, pollinator populations around the globe are in decline. Over 28% of North America's bumblebee populations have decreased significantly, and one study from 2016 showed a decline of over 75% in flying insect biomass over a 27-year period. Increased temperatures, weather variability, development, and agriculture all put insects at risk. So how can we help? Recently, there's been a lot of talk about wildflower meadows and how they can be a great way to support pollinators locally. Creating a wildflower meadow is often portrayed as an easy alternative to a lawn. Simply throw a mix of seeds on the area and a meadow will grow. But in order to create a long-lasting meadow that won't be overtaken by weeds immediately, significant prep is involved, and this simple solution proves to be much more complicated than it seems. While it can seem daunting to create a space for pollinators, especially after learning about the intense care it can take to get it right, Scott and I explore some of the reasons that make it worth giving a try.
Hi, I'm Scott Ferguson. I'm a horticulturalist here at the UBC Botanical Garden, and I work primarily in the entrance gardens and the reception center gardens.
So we're talking today about the pollinator meadow that you've been working a bit on the past couple years. So can you tell me a little bit about what you did to create that pollinator meadow and how that experience has been for you?
Yeah, so it's been a bit of a wild ride. Meadows are a tricky thing. I've learned a lot through the years. I'm still working on it. I can't say it's been successes the whole way, but the wildlife does seem to be enjoying it. I saw a hummingbird in there this morning, so that was nice. Yeah, basically the meadow is a strip in our parking lot, and it was kind of overflowing with soil. So the soil was actually a little bit too high and it was uneven. So my first goal I really wanted to do was to actually just like make it even and so level it out. And I was like, okay, well, we'll throw down some wildflower seeds here after we do that. So in the winter, we scrape back all the soil, and then after we scraped it back, I realized that the soil that was underneath was almost like pure concrete, truly like impenetrable. Couldn't put a shovel in it if you wanted to. So then I was like, okay, well, this is going to be a problem, because what I knew about wildflowers at the time was that even though they prefer poor soils, they prefer poor, well-draining soils, not compacted soils. So then I went through and I took a rototiller to it and rototilled the whole thing, made it all nice and even, and then made sure to put seeds down in the very early spring so that there'd be lots of rain to help the seeds germinate. And it worked wonderfully for about the first half of the season, and then it started to have some challenges. The blend, it was great. It was donated to us by West Coast Seeds, and it was a wildflower meadow blend. Very beautiful, lots of great native and kind of native adjacent flowers, like, including like California poppies. A lot of West Coast stuff.
That first year, the meadow bloomed with clover, baby blue eyes, daisies, and meadow foam, among many other flowers.
And so the seeds all germinated, which was great. There was a beautiful show, very colorful, and it was going really well. But what happened after is that the perennial grasses, grasses that survived the rototilling and all that, just because they just need to be a little piece of root and it can bounce back, they started to recover and quickly take over. And it was okay, I did a mow in the summer, it still looked fine. But this year in the spring, I very quickly realized that it wasn't going to be nearly as colorful because the grasses had really started to take over.
Grasses are really competitive species and are able to populate areas very quickly, taking over the less competitive species in the area.
Basically, what I've learned since is that if you want to make a meadow that looks full of flowers and is not being invaded by, grasses and weeds that you don't want, you really have to ensure that the site is sterile before you go in putting new seed. And so a lot of the books I read afterwards were like, oh, you really gotta use either a round of herbicide like glyphosate and kill all the perennial weeds and make sure they're not coming back before you go back and add more, or you can solarize it, cover it with plastic for a year to kill the perennial roots that are in there in the seed bank. But these are both kind of tough options for us. One, just, it's a lot of work for sure, but more importantly, it's in our parking lot and most of our visitors arrive by car. So I'm still struggling with the idea of having it look so rough for, a full year, a full season. Like this is the first thing you come into.
Being situated at the entrance of the garden, Scott is aware that these areas make a first impression on visitors. Many people come to gardens expecting to see a well-tended, aesthetically pleasing space, and the entrance gardens here have to be welcoming to these visitors.
So you have a few options here, basically, like go back to being a lawn, which I didn't really want to do because I do want it to be a pollinator space. So I decided, okay, well, this isn't going to look the way the public's going to love. So what can I do just with the resources I have? Like I basically work out here by myself. So what I decided to do was say, okay, I'm just not going to do any mowing during the summer. Like I did one short mow right when things were quite small still, but then I'm not going to mow the rest of the season, see how that goes. But to make that work in the way the public will accept, you kind of have to use a lot of design principles. And so that's kind of been my strategy that I'm experimenting with this year, is how can I use the principles of aesthetic design to basically trick people into being okay with something that otherwise looks pretty messy. Basically, if you put a hard line on the edge of something, or a tightly clipped or neatly mowed path through the middle of something, people's eyes generally go towards those lines and they kind of forgive what's behind the lines.
Alongside making the area more aesthetically pleasing, the paths that Scott has mowed invite you to wander through the meadow, experiencing the ecosystem from the inside, rather than observing it from a distance. Visitors are able to smell the flowers, hear the bees buzz, and watch as natural pollination processes occur right before their eyes. Less mowing can be beneficial not only for the ecosystem, but also from a lawn care perspective. Less energy is required for upkeep, and you won't need to water as often, as the taller plants will keep the moisture from evaporating. But what about the perceptions of the space? How do you balance these benefits while keeping the space looking aesthetically pleasing?
I'm doing almost artificially created beds where I'm just not mowing around different oval and circular and kind of curved shapes so that it looks as if this was a planted bed, but it's actually just like a intentionally designed area I'm not mowing. It's really just trying to play around with how can we make this look aesthetically okay for visitors while also having the benefits of wildlife. When we talk about like sustainable design and sustainability and green spaces, a lot of people really think of black and white, and so it's like either it's got to be like entirely untouched or it's got to be completely managed. But I always take the holistic term of the word sustainability when I think about things. Like, is this sustainable in that it's also liked by the public? Like, will this be sustained as a project at all? Because you can have a great space that you let go rampant, but then if all the local neighbors complain, then all your hard work is kind of pointless. And then they say make it back into lawn or whatever, and then maybe it's going to be less beneficial than if you had just cut out a few of those. Yeah, they're local plants, but maybe they were just aesthetically unappealing in the way that they were arranged.
In spaces like public gardens and lawns, public perception is an inevitable factor to consider. This can be discouraging to homeowners trying to rewild their yards, and in a botanical garden, people come in with an expectation of how a garden should look, which influences how horticulturalists manage their spaces.
The nice thing is we are not inherently a show garden. Like, we're a research garden, so I think we are given a little more leeway, having a bit more of a maybe wild look and not just like rows and rows of geraniums or petunias or whatnot. I do think that is hard for a lot of people to change their mind about what a garden is, because like the average person really doesn't know anything about plants. So you're already starting from there. Most visitors' expectations are, it needs to be a rose garden to be a garden, or lots of, color and annuals and stuff. And so that's a hard thing to get people to kind of get used to that, which is why I'm trying to be like, can I make this aesthetically nice? So there's kind of pushing people's boundaries, hopefully guiding them softly by trying to be like, I think of those kind of aesthetic design things as like throwing people a bone. like, okay, like I'll thin this, or I'll add these hard lines, or this curvy path, or this feeling of intentionality to kind of help you get over the like, oh, this is like an unknown kind of wild space.
So what can home gardeners take away from this? What advice would Scott give to someone who wanted to implement some of these things that he's learned, or create a meadow or a less mowed space in their yard?
I think I would say basically some is better than none, right? Like, I think people think like, oh, I have to like, you're telling me I can't have any mowed space, or I can't do any weeding in that space, or it needs to be exactly all native species in the meadow or whatnot. And I feel like truly, even if you just go even and stand there, it's like, yeah, there's far fewer native flowers than there were last season, but there's still bees going crazy on the clover and the California poppies and the other flowers that are there. And hummingbird, I couldn't believe I saw a hummingbird on clover this morning, but I did. But yeah, I'd say nothing has to be so black and white or so hard, right? Like, if you need to like it for it to be sustainable, so even just improving a little bit by not mowing a section, and then if you have to do a little weeding in that to make it okay for you, then that's definitely better than not doing anything.
It can be a lot harder than one may anticipate to do something like creating a pollinator meadow. There's a lot of intense prep involved in actually making it work and keeping invasive plants out. Because they're often portrayed as an easy, low-maintenance project, people who try to create a pollinator meadow may be disappointed with the results, when weeds take over or less flowers bloom than expected. That being said, things don't have to work out perfectly to be worth doing. There is a lot of value in doing something even when it's not perfect. In fact, by trying things out and using an experimental process, we can learn from our successes and mistakes and adapt our practices accordingly. By experimenting, rather than following a set of steps, you play a more involved role in the ecosystem, and you may have greater success figuring out your garden's specific needs. Every garden and every gardener has different influencing factors. The soil health, climate, and social environment may be drastically different from one garden to the next. Doing what works for you will always be better than trying to duplicate something else exactly. So if you're trying to make a space for pollinators but are experiencing some difficulties, I encourage you to let go of your expectations, keep trying different things, and really pay attention to how your garden responds. While you may not get exactly what you pictured at the start, you may be surprised by how much you learn in the process. Thanks for listening to Garden Ecologies. I hope you'll join me next time.